In this chapter, I look at the work of Alexander Macheron. Macheron, among a number of other things, argues that the state is a spinocistic individual. There is a passage where Spinoza talks about individuals being made of the simplest bodies, and then little individuals made up of those individuals, and individuals made up of those individuals, all the way up to the infinite individual, nature as a whole. And somewhere in the middle of that are human beings. So human beings are part of some larger individual. Which individual is it? Macheron argues that it's the state. The state is that sort of individual. The state has a kind of knatus, a striving to persevere itself. It makes treaties, it fights wars in self-defense, it punishes miscreants and things of that nature. So it has a certain kind of unity. But I follow Steve Barboni and Lee Rice in arguing that when Spinoza talks even about a state kind of striving and so on, he's really speaking sort of metaphorically. And the main argument there is that individuals exist for their own sake and in their own right, but the state is kind of a construction of human need and a construction of human desire. And since that's the case, the state exists for spinocistic individuals. It doesn't seem to make sense that the individuals would exist as simply part of the state. The state is sort of, it arises naturally out of our human needs, but it's not a natural entity in its own right. It's natural for us to form this kind of situation. And I go on a little bit with that. The San Diego Chargers came up quite a bit in that chapter, as Dr. Starr pointed out, that I say you talk about the San Diego Chargers as one thing, but they're not an individual. There's no individual called the Chargers.
I got a break on those pages.
Yes, there you go. That's the football gets you on those. And I owe that, that's Steve Barboni mentioned that in an article, and I kind of took it from him in that regard. And moving to chapter 4, I start to kind of look at the sort of ethical implications of this. So I take on the view that Spinoza is considered an egoist. He's considered both an ethical and psychological egoist. Psychological egoist being one that's saying this is how people act. People act in their own self-interest. This is the way they behave. And an ethical egoist saying, well, this is how people should behave. The right thing to do is to pursue your own self-interest. There are various arguments for that. And it's pretty common to read Spinoza this way. It's not universal. There's scholars who would not read Spinoza that way. But that's fairly common reading. He's kind of an enlightened egoist, meaning that he thinks morality and cooperation are good because they serve our self-interest, and so on. The crux of this chapter, and I look at several thinkers. I look at Rice's work again, and I look at a couple of feminist readings of Spinoza, Armstrong and Raven. And these readings all sort of agree, although in this respect, although they don't think. I think the two feminist writers misread Rice a little bit. They regard him as reading Spinoza as an egoist, which is not, I think, Rice's position. He can correct me if I'm wrong. But I don't think that's his position. I think they would all agree in the basic idea that Spinoza doesn't hold a kind of notion of the self as a self-focused, self-contained, sort of atomistic creature that is first concerned with its own good and its own impulses only, right? As if it was cut off from things outside. They also put this, Spinoza thinks that the individual is fundamentally related to his or her environment, fundamentally interactive with it, fundamentally shaped by it, fundamentally in relation to it, however you want to express that. And so you can't say that Spinoza thinks of these sort of atomic individuals pursuing their own interests and coming together to cooperate. Rather, they're sort of naturally in this network of embedded relationships. I don't know that all these thinkers would use that language, but something like that has been argued. And I argue that this is actually incompatible with egoism, at least as normally understood. As normally understood, I think egoism is the view that I should be focused on, or I am, depending on whether we're psychological or ethical egoists here. And I usually mean both. I just use the term egoism. That we're primarily focused on our own well-being, as if the well-being of others wasn't really important except as an afterthought. And I don't think Spinoza holds a conception of the self, the individual relation to others that allows that. So that's chapter 4. It has a few other interesting things too, but they're a little off our topic. Chapter 5, I can sum up pretty briefly. This is just kind of some concluding reflections for further study. It brings up Spinoza's theory of state. One thing I do want to point out is I find in Spinoza's writing that there's this sense where Spinoza thinks in terms of absolute obedience to authority. It's always rational to obey the authority rather than to disobey because of the advantages of civil society over being by yourself. And Spinoza seems to say that, but he does say there are two things we should understand about somebody living in a civil state. They're both citizens and subjects, and they're subjects insofar as they have to obey, but they are citizens insofar as certain benefits of civil society are conferred upon them. A certain standard of protection and security and peace is given to them, provided to them by the state. And we always have to be both subjects and citizens. So we're not just there to obey, we're there for certain advantages that accrue to us as being citizens. And when one of my theses in here is when the state undermines our status as citizens, when the state doesn't confer upon us the benefits of citizenship, it loses its authority to expect obedience from us as subjects. And among these benefits, there are a number of things. I apply to some contemporary issues. I talk about Spinoza and health care coverage. I argue that Spinoza would be in favor of the view that everyone should have affordable and accessible health care coverage. How you would deliver that, who cares? That's not the point in that regard. The point is only that I think Spinoza would favor that conception of state where you need to be given certain goods. Maybe education would be there too. I just chose health care as one example among many. Or you're not getting the benefits of civil society. I think that is Spinoza's view. It differs a bit from some views popular today. We're a bit more hands-off in our approach to governance, I think, than Spinoza is. And maybe, we wouldn't be comfortable with his degree of state control in that regard. But that's sort of how I sum it up and come to a kind of conclusion, and that pretty much wraps up the 5 chapters.
Thank you very much.